Hey everybody, it's Espira, and we are live in the hotel room of Palm Springs. I'm still vibing it out here on my Monday while I'm waiting for my late flight to get back home, but we did play out the Grand Open and scored us a top 32, finishing in 28th place to get our Pro Tour invite. So I figured, why not talk about the deck? Let's throw it together, and this will be a little bit more freestyle. Like you can see, I'm rocking the free cam right now. It's not gonna be as clean as my usual deck profiles and as my usual coverage of the events, but regardless, I figured you guys would want the list, so how about we just do it raw this time? So this is my deck profile that I took to the Grand Open that I want to call Red White Hippo. So here is the entire deck. I know some people just want this and want to move on. So if you want the list, here you are, but we'll be jumping into a card by card because it's just easier that way, especially since I'm just rocking the free hand cam. So jumping it in, the all-star of the show. You guys always know that I've been a #1 proponent of Hippo. Okay, maybe that's not true. I used to say that this card was nominally pretty bad, and I still stand that at the time when the meta really was just Nova and like Curse Dragon combo, effectively this card did almost nothing. But in a world where aggro is incredibly good, be able to sneak this against your opponent, there's so many times where like Hippo just bought me an extra turn or was able to get me to a point where I could stabilize. I was able to like double Hippo my opponent sometimes to be able to get me out of range of their aggro, and we're in an aggro meta, guys. Between Pterosaur, between white aggro, you are going to want to lean your decks towards more defense, which is why this deck, the idea was basically all-star early game into rock solid late game. That's it. So I want to run the best early game cards to be able to make sure I can get to my late game and create a sense of inevitability. So with Hippo, incredibly good, able to get in there. If you go first, you set up like a Nexus or something else, and then you go into him to sneak it in. If you go second, your opponent Nexuses, or they play some body that doesn't matter, you can just kind of go in, get in there, and do some big damage, get some heals. All-star, love this card. It's also the only yellow card in the deck. Then we've got Fish. Again, stalls board, does incredibly well. Uses up the Soul Core, which you want to use in some other pieces, so you can't rock them out at 4, but nevertheless, just good to be able to stall out or go 2 for 1, which is always a big deal. Same thing, turn 1 Peggy is pretty big because it can block, it prevents your opponent from being able to go like 5 wide and actually get some solid blocks. If you're going second, you can 2-core it, which means it's a 4K blocker, which is pretty significant, and obviously the armor helps. It's not perfect. People can get around armor pretty easily, but nevertheless, it is good in terms of having an early blocker that can go wide, can go big, so pretty good. And then just having the armor makes him a viable attacker too. And then finally, while it's not part of the this is the all-star lineup, I think this could be splashable in any deck if you want like a solid early game. Though, that said, Bullet Raid is pretty good too. Being a 2-core 5K is incredible. It can apply really good tempo, really good pressure, but nevertheless, a very solid card, super happy. And then finally, Suppression. I rocked it at 4 because I am a primarily white heavy deck, but nevertheless, this card is an all-star. It's basically Absolute Ice Shield copies 5 through 8, and additionally, it's Absolute Ice Shield that removes one of your opponent's spirits, which is incredibly good. You guys can see that Aggro's been running this card, Red Pterosaur now runs this card, White Aggro runs this card, and I think you should really be considering running this because it is so aggro right now that you want more Absolute Ice Shields, and again, it's board control without having to like commit into like hard removal in your deck that could be dead depending on what happens. It's almost always live. The only part is that you need a board, which means if they like Valkyrie missed away your board, then obviously it feels bad. But nevertheless, super good all-star. Always at this point, I recommend that you guys main deck some number of suppression in all your decks. So that was the early game. Then we move on to the red because obviously we want to be able to draw into the stuff that we need or want to shuffle out some of our late game stuff. So Volcanic Canyon, a turn 1 Canyon can definitely help because sometimes you end up in a hand that's clunky with like a bunch of Nomen Guards and stuff like that. So having the Canyon definitely helps out in being able to cycle away from that. It also pushes your bodies above threshold. Sometimes your bodies can sit at like an awkward number. So a 1-core on Volcanic Canyon can get you out of like Burning Force range. It can push your Hippo into like 5K territory, which means it can compete with like other bullet rays and stuff like that. So extremely good. Starblast draw, people are playing less on summons. So instead of going the 4 Starblast, we went 3 and then the 1 charge draw, which is just like, in a sticky situation, it's a battle trick that can help me contest, especially since everyone's always running this card now. Then we got Burning Force, we do run as a 2 of. The third one is in the sideboard. And of course, that's just to make sure we can deal with Nexuses, or if they go wide, then we can kill 2 bodies. Super clutch. There's an argument that it should be 3 or 4 in the main board. I don't disagree there. So that is like the general core of the deck in terms of like the early game stuff. Then you have like your techier options. Snowflaking, because obviously there's a lot of Pterosaur around, so anything I can do to stall the Gagano by like a turn or two and be annoying. The card wasn't great though, to be honest. I think I could see myself cutting this down to 2. I think having some number in your main and sideboard makes sense just because generally you're gonna need it, especially since like some people are playing curse aggro now too. But generally I think it was okay. It was fine. It did what it had to. It wasn't amazing. But, you know, it's a body at the end of the day, and it has some decent reductions, which means it only costs 1. That said, Valkyrie Mist is an all-star. This card's incredible. It's so good. It bounces Elks, which is super annoying. To be honest, I could see myself going down on Snowflaking and going up for this, because this deck can tempo, right? Like, even though you're gaining life with Hippo, you're aggressing with tempo. Bullet Raising incredible body. You can attack 100% with this card. So having this in more copies is definitely something I want to do. So I think maxing out on Valk probably makes a ton of sense. Even though you can get punished by a Star Blast, I did end up winning a game where I was able to draw 4 because they played like a mediocre Valk. But nevertheless, the card's incredibly good. Was a consistent all-star that I want to see all the time. So I've always said this card was a staple. It's a 2-0 splash here in this deck. I could see it going to 4. Now we get into the late game. So the idea was to create late game boards that were inevitable once we had the early game to stabilize and get there. Obviously, white is the best late game color, so that's where we stuck a lot of this. So we got 2 fortresses, so if we ever need to go into an early hippo or an early elk. Or an early elephant, I mean. Elephant was fine. I like the card a lot, but the problem is against aggro, it kind of doesn't do anything. So even if you have like a turn 2 hippo, where it's like, or a turn 2 elephant, where they turn 1 you play this, they hit you. If you are the first turn player, that actually gives you enough course to go into an elephant. It's fine. It wasn't amazing. I love the card, don't get me wrong, and obviously it puts you in a really good position where once you can get the refreshes all the time. So I think at this moment he's a better aggressor than something that draws you and ramps you a ton. I could see myself cutting down to 2. So really, what I would do with this deck, and we're going to go through it as we go through it, is probably cut down even more on the late game stuff to just give me more mid-range pieces so I can be a better mid-range deck. This is almost true and true to being a pure mid-range deck in terms of having early game, late game, whatever. I think we just need to tighten with the spots. So I think Nomen Guard main board, I think you go down to like maybe 2. Elk, we're at a 3 of. I don't need to explain, obviously, late game inevitability. I could see myself going down to 2 also, just because an early Elk kind of doesn't do anything, especially in a format with this stupid card. So like it's only really good if you have Enterprise. Enterprise is sick though. I think Enterprise at 3 makes a lot of sense. Cut down these 2, but like this, like the dual blocker is huge. The armor white is huge. So I think Enterprise at 3 makes a ton of sense. You know, these 3 cards are like your atypical like white control package. Finally, we have Dual Gun. Dual Gun's amazing. I want to bump him up to like 2 or 3. There's so many games where it's just like, oh, I just need a Dual Gun because the board is looking super annoying. So I think bumping it up to 2 makes a lot of sense, where like you slash these by 2, you go up to a second Dual Gun and probably run like a third in the side, and that'd be amazing. And then obviously we're a Battle Spirits deck, so we run 4 Ice Shields, not much to say there. And then we run the 3 Dream Bombs. Honestly, bursting this is super good. Having the tempo of like stopping an opponent's Nexus and then going into a removal as well is huge. So this card's amazing, absolutely great. 3 up, I think I have the 4th in the sideboard. So yeah, so this is the general main deck. Again, like I said, change-wise, I would mess with this a little bit. I would mess with like these ratios a little bit just to make it more mid-rangey. Definitely want to bump up the Valks and then just have a couple of things that deal even better with the early game. But that was great. I loved having the Hippo. And that's the main board. And then I guess if we want to... Anyways, so let's clear up some room and talk about the sideboard. So the Burning Force, obviously great if you're going up against the aggro matchup. If you're going up against purple, it's just to make sure that you can actually adequately deal with depths. So run 1 up there. Like I said, Dual Gun. So we do run a second one in the side. I think the idea here is to go second in the main and then third one in the side. Because I do believe oh no, yeah, there we go. So we actually have 2 in the side. So white control matchup or any matchup that I feel like can create a jammy board, you just kind of throw this in. Fulla, obviously, if you play against purple, you want to just make it more annoying for them to have to pop off. So we run the 3 there because we are a white core. And then if we're playing against white decks, well, why don't we just run Curse Dragon combo? The game's going to go late anyways, and the best way to deal with it. So game 1, they see that, like, I'm not a purple deck. They don't always, but sometimes they tech out the Fullas. And then I'm like, all right, sick. So now that you're not playing... Like, I had one player who played double Fulla on game 2 or 3 or something like that just to get the reductions, and then remove them on board to pay for something else, and then I just went right into the Curse Dragon combo. So it's a nice, it's expensive, but like if we're in a world where you expect to play against white control, it's just a good tech to be able to clear their board and make things a little bit easier for you. But nevertheless, that is the deck. And guys, that is the profile. Ended up going X3, only really losing to white aggro. I punted one game, but like white aggro will just get there sometimes, so I'm not really putting too much pressure on myself about that. The deck will do its thing. Sometimes you just don't see the pieces you need to be able to survive. I love this deck. It's great. I think I can tune the ratios. So I do think moving forward, I'll probably try to upgrade this deck, do some cool stuff with it. So obviously, if you guys want to see where this deck goes next, I think it is definitely a great mid-range contender for this meta, off the back of like the amazing early game of Fish, Hippo, absolute all-star, Peggy, awesome, into some great late games. So I think we can really balance out the ratio. So with that said, if you guys want to keep on following the journey of this deck, subscribe buttons in the bottom. I had a ton of fun. I look forward to competing even more. And now that we're qualified for the PT, it's time to get ready to take down the first Pro Tour. So with that said, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Ciao.